Robert, you're always going off in new directions in your novels. Do you like setting yourself new challenges? Is that part of it?
I do really, yes. I mean, you have to spend a couple of years with each book, and it has to be something that interests you. And mine generally start with a sort of feeling of, I wonder how that was, or I wonder what it would have been like to be there. And so I range from, sort of 2,000 years ago to slightly in the future, or indeed in a past in fatherland that never actually existed. It doesn't matter to me. It's the story which is what counts.
And you're fascinated by power, aren't you? And the people, what happens to people once they get into it, and how it's used, how power is used.
Yes, I think that this is from childhood, really. I was very interested in politics and power, and it's my sort of area, really. I worked on as a political journalist. I've known a lot of politicians, and I am intrigued by it, the way that power operates and the effects it has on human beings. And politics is often dismissed as dull. Well, I think it's the most interesting thing there is. And I'm categorized as a thriller writer, I think partly because I write about politics, and anyone who does that, because the stuff of politics is so often intrigue or mystery or sudden rise or fall, or these tend to be dismissed as tropes of a thriller or a mystery story, whereas in fact, as we all know, if we actually look at politics or follow it, it naturally falls in that way. And so, it's my particular thing, really.
And that's what, in a way, links your treatment of, say, Cicero on the one hand, and then you move to the ghost and deal with a modern politician on the other, I suppose.
Yes, I always wanted to not write a book about modern politics. I thought the idea of inventing a prime minister and so on was corny and irritating, especially when the real things are so bizarre. Why would one feel the need to invent? That's why I wrote the books about Cicero, because it was a way of universalizing politics, the Senate, the elections and the courts. But with the ghost, obviously, for me, that was just too good a story to miss, in a way. But all my books are, pretty well all of them are politics. I think Fatherland, right through to the most recent, the Dreyfus book, which is also really about the operation of power and a government cover-up.
I think you've said, in reference to that book, that you'll never think the same about bureaucracies again, having written it.
No, it had a strong effect upon me. The pleasure of writing that book was to get inside the head of the protagonist, Colonel Picard, who begins as a very straight military officer and gradually uncovers all around him the people he's reporting to, the people he's working with in the office, the clerks beneath him. They're all involved in a conspiracy to keep this innocent man on Devil's Island. And I tried to write it as realistically as possible and not to make these other men monsters. And one sees how a bureaucracy will cover up its mistakes and how decent men will nonetheless lie through their teeth for what they conceive to be the greater good, for
Yes,
their
I think
comrades.
that's what's clever about the book, is that you do feel a certain sympathy for some of these people.
Yes, and it's that novel is about the French army, but it could equally well be about the British Army or the American government or the NHS or the BBC or any large organisation where people are prepared to lie and cover up mistakes. And I think that the book may have hit a chord precisely for that reason. I hope it's a colourful, evocative book about Paris in the 1890s, which is a wonderful period to write about. But more than that, the lessons from that time, apply now and in every country, really.
Yeah. You talked about Picard. When you create or think up characters, do you live with them for a bit before you write? Do you get to know them very well?
Yes, I think that you can't embark on writing a novel unless you've got quite a lot of facts already at your disposal. I mean, one of the breakthroughs for me becoming a full-time novelist was to realise a novel describes something that has already happened. Therefore, you wouldn't embark on it unless you had some conception of what happened and also of the people. At the same time, the characters, as you explore them, the Picard being an example, you get to know them better as you write. It's only that daily 4 or 5 hours of intense concentration that the character begins to yield and you start to see them.
Which novelists would you say have influenced you most?
Well, I studied English at university, so I've read quite a lot. But definitely for me, well, Dickens was a strong influence, particularly Great Expectations. But then coming into the 20th century, there's a sort of line of writers: Conrad, Green, Orwell, and coming up to the present day, Le Carré. And they write novels that are, in many ways, political novels. They are connected with the real world and, again, often categorized as thrillers. Not perhaps, obviously, Conrad, but Green and 1984 is a thriller, essentially.
Well, up to a point, Conrad too, of course.
Yes, I mean, The Secret Agent is an absolutely heart-stopping book, really. It's very, very tense. And it's the mother and father, really, of the modern, it seems to me, paranoid espionage conspiracy thriller.
And then Somerset Maugham, of course, wrote the thrillers.
Maugham. Yeah, I mean, books that have that connection, I think, I find fascinating. I mean, I also very much enjoy Evelyn Waugh as well. I mean, but that sort of 20th century English tradition of novelists, they're the ones that I go back to again and again.
Do you think too much of a distinction is made between thriller writers on the one hand and so-called literary fiction on the other?
Yes, not just thrillers, but just generally sort of popular fiction. I think that there has been a disastrous bifurcation of, I mean, there have always been, or certainly since, the early 20th century, there have been almost willfully obscure books which are trying to explore what it is to write a book and that sort of thing, which clearly is a minority taste. But there is, it seems to me, you almost trace it to the development and increasing influence of the Booker Prize, a quite disastrous peeling away between the popular books that you might buy at an airport and take on holiday and what is supposed to be good for you. And I think that's bad. I think it's bad for our literary culture.
What about your? I mean, you've now, I think I'm right in saying you've written nine novels.
Yeah.
You're quite prolific. When do you write? Do you write early in the morning?
Yes, I have. I'm a morning person, and I think really the level of concentration you have to bring to it if you can. I don't think you can write for much more than 4 or 5 hours. So I tend to start pretty early in the morning and finish about noon or 1 o'clock.
Don't you get up at 4:30 or something?
So well,
occasionally.
Yes, when it's summer, May, June, and I normally submit my books in July, and they come out in September or October. So I associate writing very much with coming into the closing stages of a book, getting up at 5, perhaps 5:30. And, if you can look at the clock and you've got sort of 800 words written by 9:30, then the day becomes much more pleasant. And this is, I think, is a throwback to the time when I was a newspaper columnist, whereas, you have a space that's got to be filled and you just got to get on and do it. And I quite like that process. I mean, there's nothing more easy than to postpone writing. It's the ultimate easily put off job.
Well, it brings me on to my last question, which is if you had a tip for an aspiring writer or novelist, what would it be?
Well, I think it often seems to me that a writer has to have two separate people balanced in their own heads, and you have to be a creator and a critic. And probably the trick is to try and keep these two characters in balance, because if you're just pouring things out creatively, you may just be producing a lot of rubbish, or it's just too easy. On the other hand, if the critic predominates, you'll never write anything. You become so constrained by, it's not as good as Balzac or Victor Hugo or Virginia Woolf. Then you won't do anything. So I think you have to keep these two things in your head and enjoy it, I think, is the other thing. It was a big breakthrough for me. I was writing Enigma, my second novel, which was a real tough battle.
I think that's the one you got nearest to having writer's block.
Yes, I did, about a year probably.
It must be so difficult following up a bestseller with a second book.
Yeah, no, it is, I mean, I'm glad that Fatherland was successful, obviously, but it does give you quite a sort of overhang at your back. I wasn't sure quite how I'd managed to pull it off, and could I do it again? And a breakthrough for me was reading the letters of Raymond Chandler, and he said, I can't understand why a writer complains about writing. I mean, either you take a joy in the process of creation, otherwise why are you a writer? And it's a very simple thing to say, but I suddenly thought, yeah, that's true. And I do think quite a lot in life is an attitude of mind, and I thought, well, I'll enjoy it. And pretty well from that moment on, I have enjoyed it. I've had long periods, 5 years at one point, when I didn't publish anything, but the ideas were coming and I never threw them away. So I had an idea for a book about, or a play about, a ghostwriter 15 years before I actually produced it. And various other things, an idea about artificial intelligence, which eventually became the Fear Index. Often ideas or even paragraphs, pages of work, you should never throw anything away. That's my final bit of Dutch uncle advice, because you'll be surprised how often you're just putting it in the wrong place and it will come in right later.